there was like a guy from the NBC 10 news that just like interviewed me, and he was like, what is this? Like, I've been reporting for 30 years and I've never seen anything like this.
This is Max Rameau, strategist, theorist, author, and organizer with Pan-African Community Action, and you are listening to The Next World, a podcast about building movements. Once a month on this show, we will explore and celebrate the work of poor people's movements, particularly in the U.S. We will highlight innovative and powerful organizing campaigns and community building led by women, LGBTQ folks, Black communities, and other people of color that are pushing the boundaries and have the potential to transform this society. Today on the show, we're focusing on housing actions and victories in Philadelphia, and our guests are Sterling Johnson and Jenn Bennetch, two organizers with Philadelphia Housing Action. Together, we will explore their victories and setbacks in their work to take over vacant housing in Philadelphia and their lessons for the movement on the human right to housing. Sterling and Jenn, thank you so much for joining us on The Next World. We are really excited to have you here from Philadelphia Housing Action. And this is just really difficult to wrap our brains around. Again, so I just want to confirm, is it true that Philadelphia Housing Action has won your campaign and the city of Philadelphia is giving you 50 units of housing? Is that correct? Is that accurate? Is that a mirage? Is that a dream? Am I dreaming?
Yeah, it's correct. It's actually 25 houses coming from the city and 25 houses coming from PHA, but there was also a...
PHA meaning Philadelphia Housing Authority, is that right?
Philadelphia Housing Authority, yes. And then there was a separate agreement with the smaller encampment that was at the Housing Authority, so that brings 9 additional properties, and then the properties that were already occupied that we had put families in will also be transferred to the land trust.
So what's the grant? So does that mean 59, 60?
It'll probably be closer to 70 with the units that are already squatted.
Wow, that's incredible. So basically a movement organization. You're not a 501c3 or anything like that. You don't have like $1 million budget or anything. Are you directly getting checks from George Soros?
No.
I think this is really exciting, and I think this is a game changer in the movement. But let's start from the beginning. How did it get here? You're in Philadelphia. There is a housing shortage there, as there are in many parts of the world. And presumably you are getting together, your organizers are getting together, and you're talking about what you can do and what some of your options are and what you want. How did this come about? What do you do? What are your first steps? What's the time frame here when this campaign is starting? And what exactly are you deciding to do? And then how do you do it?
It's like this has been a campaign for myself personally and the others still in our own ways for years before this. So I guess number one is that I was formerly homeless. I was homeless for 7 years. I slept on the streets of Center City, Philadelphia, and I didn't really at the time, being like young and freshly homeless, didn't really understand the politics and that I'm sleeping at City Hall and people are walking past me to get awards for serving the homeless population and not even acknowledging our presence. So there's that part of the history. But more recently, I live in North Philadelphia now, and I went through an issue with the Housing Authority police force, and they had vehicles that looked exactly like the Philadelphia police. So I went on this mission to like get them to have distinctively marked vehicles in uniforms so that they couldn't like engage in Fourth Amendment violations without people even knowing what happened. And through that process of going to the Housing Authority board meetings, I started to really see how they were spending millions of dollars a month on everything but housing people. And I started to see how they were selling off all the land, and particularly in my neighborhood. And then I started to see that actually like riding around, walking around, and people that I know are being moved and houses are being boarded up and then they're being sold and then there's student housing, and just kind of flipping the whole neighborhood through this process of selling the land and houses that were owned by the PHA. So that's kind of like what led up to all of this for me, was trying to stop the auctions and trying to keep my neighbors in their homes and trying to get the PHA to house people on the waiting list instead of selling the houses off to private developers. And I occupied PHA headquarters last year for 5 months. It wasn't as big. It's a brand new $45 million office. Nobody really paid attention. There may have been 2 news articles. And at that time, we were trying to like stop the auctions, get the police force disbanded, get the CEO fired for like paying himself double the federal cap, things like that. And over the years since then, I started working with like Sterling and Wiley and others, and did more research and learned that the houses that were being auctioned were RAD, which means the assistance is like transferred to another unit, and that unit will be disposed of, so they couldn't house families. So that's kind of where the demand to have the houses put into a land trust evolved from. Like, we all knew that they would be sold and wouldn't house a family anyway. So that's kind of how we ended up here. And, you know, I was keeping a list of empty properties, trying to see if maybe we could get an attorney to like sue the city and housing authority for their role in like intentionally displacing Black people from the neighborhood. And at some point, we all kind of together came up with the idea to start like housing people in those empty units to push for the demands.
Wow. And this happened while you were learning how to organize while you were doing it, or were you part of a bigger organization that was teaching you to be an organizer?
No, I was just the person that was really angry at the PHA.
All right. Sterling, what about you?
Yeah. There's like a definite part of this thing where it's like we're just like kind of embedded in these places and these people and with these people. So I will say I kind of come from the drug user population kind of thing, and I don't know, I come from the AA culture where it's like you just like talk to people, you always help people, you like are in these spaces, but people are constantly like going in and out. Some people are using, some people are not, but like these are all like your friends. So I'm just in this space where it's like self-help kind of stuff and some weird kind of ideology, Christian ideology stuff too, but try to keep away from that. Organizing is like, I just know a bunch of people that want to help people. And that's just like what it is. And then I do know a few organizations that are like long-term organizations that are like harm reduction, quote unquote, based, you know, that are Goal Collective and Project Safe. And we had early on before it kind of dissolved, there's a good drug users union that was like building up in Philadelphia about like organizing. I'm like, I'm like friends with these people. I'm like,
So because you're friends with them and you think about yourself as helping, you don't think of that, or you don't regard that as organizing? Is that what you're saying?
I think it is organizing, but it's just like different. I don't know. We use organizer because that's what's like the term, but like, I don't know. These are people that like, I just know around the city.
Uh-huh.
And of course it's organizing, but it's like, I don't know. It's like different than reaching out to people. I mean, then you see like people on the street and you're like, yeah, I used to be out on the street with that person. So yeah, I know them. You weren't like, you didn't go to Bryn Mawr or like Haverford and then you picked the cause that you wanted. And then you ended up like friends with this person because you had saw them at a clinic that you did your like rotations at or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's kind of like a lot of us, I mean, myself personally ended up in this fight out of like necessity and like living in the midst of this thing. So it's different. I think that I've kind of really learned that over the past couple months when people in other places that are in kind of movement stuff have been reaching out, and people are like, yeah, we had like the law team and the Bell Fund and the PR team and the media had the story like ready to go. And with us, it was very different. I mean, there were like 5 of us, and last year with Occupy PHA, there were like 2 of us, and really no money, no finances, no support. Like all the lawyers in Philly are in with the city, all the nonprofits are down with the city. Like we were kind of coming into this like totally alone, and we really did this from the ground. Like when you say grassroots, like this was fully like grassroots from the bottom.
So a couple trends here I'm noticing or insights here. One is that organizing doesn't necessarily mean going out and meeting a bunch of strangers and trying to convince them to join your cause. But it looks like it really does start at home. It starts with who you know and with situations that you're dealing with. And the second thing is it looks like that organizing can also benefit greatly from people who are directly impacted and who don't necessarily have this formal training in organizing, at least in the way that we think about it now. But let's shift real quick and talk about then how this came into the modern time. So we'll talk a little bit about your background in here. At some point, I got the word that there was an encampment in the city of Philadelphia where there was an empty lot, a public lot, and in that public lot there were tents that were being erected. How did we get there? How do we get from I want to help people? How do we get from yelling at the Philadelphia Housing Authority and getting them to change certain practices? How do we get to this takeover of vacant land in front of the Housing Authority and elsewhere?
Like, I'm a very direct action, crazy, spontaneous person. I mean, when I occupied the PHA last year, the one that was like totally ignored by everybody, and a lot of things happened during that, but I literally just like asked my friend Fredo if he wanted to occupy PHA, and I was like, if he says yes, we'll do it. If he says no, we won't. And he was like, yeah, fuck yeah. So that was how that one started. So I'm just really into like direct action and was really like determined for this thing. And so it started with the housing takeovers that we did, actually started before the encampment. And we started doing that way back in March. And we had to keep it really quiet because of the fact that the housing authority has like its own police force. It doesn't have to follow the law. Like, they can just use their cops to like drag people out of houses. So we were kind of like really quietly doing that. And at the time I was like already banned from the PHA board meeting, and there was like COVID. So everything was shut down, and it was kind of really difficult to be as active and do the direct actions and be in the meetings and the council sessions like we normally would. But we were spending a lot of time trying to figure out how to protect the mothers that we were putting in the houses and figuring out what means there would be to get the properties transferred. We were talking about like adverse possession or conservatorship or all these different.
So from the beginning, you wanted to get these houses turned over to you. You had that idea in your mind from the very beginning. Is that right?
From the beginning of moving people into them, yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess we were just sitting in my lot. Like, I have like a lot next to my house that's vacant, and I just like use it as like a side yard or whatever. And we were like sitting in my yard, lot eating and talking. And we kind of like jokingly, really casually talked about the idea of like starting this encampment. And then like that week we did start the encampment.
So you actually did the taking over, and the housing, just to be clear, the taking over the housing was vacant Philadelphia Housing Authority public housing units that were not housing people. They were just sitting empty. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you took those over. And then once you had a certain number of those taken, then you kind of upped the game by going into these public areas in front of the Philadelphia Housing Authority and in front of a park right off of the Benjamin Franklin Parkway, right?
Yeah. The first encampment was the one on the Parkway, and then the housing authority refused to come to the table when the city initially met with us. So I moved a group of people up to the housing authority to pressure them to have to come to the table about 2 weeks into the first encampment.
And what was the profile of the people who you were moving into the public housing? So we had on a previous edition of this show, we had Moms for Housing, which is a fantastic group out of the Bay Area in California that moved with great fanfare, moved several mothers into a vacant home and then launched an eviction defense there. What was the profile of the person who you would be moving into these housing units?
Mostly mothers. There wasn't really a process. It was just kind of like, we believe that everybody deserves housing. So it was kind of whoever reached out and wanted to and was willing to move in the houses, which ended up initially being mostly mothers. And then kind of as the encampment started, we started moving some of the people from the encampment into houses also, which were more like single people or couples.
Well, talk about the encampment for a moment. So the encampment is right next to an expressway. It's a big public park. And what happened there? What did you do there? And what did the encampment, as you're calling it, look like?
It started with 5 people at tents, and by the end of the weekend, by the first weekend, there were over 100 people there already. There we had like big banners hanging up. We were doing a lot of actions early on. It got to a point where we blocked off traffic to like a main street for like starting like over a month.
Oh yeah, wow! I forgot about that. Yeah, that was. They changed bus routes. They were just like, I guess we're changing the bus route now. I'm like, yeah, good stuff.
And well, just to be clear, when you're saying there were 100 people there, or started out with 5 people, you mean otherwise street homeless people who now were living inside of tents laid out in this intentionally built community.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So people are starting to flock here. They're hearing that it's there. People are starting to flock there. You went from 5 to 100 within a week, from 5 tents or whatever number of tents it took to house that number of people, all the way up to 100 people, and then grew from there. What was day-to-day life there? How were decisions made? Were decisions made inside of the group, or were just people coming? And then if they were made, how were they made? And what was the relationship between, I know you feel uncomfortable with this term in some ways, but between the organizers and the residents? Or did you see a difference between them? Or did you see a relationship?
I mean, in terms of the way decisions were made, the culture would change a lot because people, just the vibe would change drastically.
Based on who was there, you mean? Based on who was there?
Everything from the volunteers that would come and get really excited about it, to some of the people that were unhoused that then would kind of take some kind of leadership role, or they'd be given a leadership role by a volunteer in a way that would. It was very interesting. It was I don't know. There's so many contested things around encampment. The whole goal is like this self-governing space where people are able to talk to each other and figure out issues, and no cops are involved. But I think I don't know. That's a whole other episode, Max, in terms of like making this new world and how that was supposed to happen. It was kind of just a space where a lot of the things that were happening around there were happening at the encampment, just in terms of like the harms of people, joys of people. But I would say that nobody was.
Well, the camp was not an oasis. This wasn't some Garden of Eden that was created, right? The problems that people brought from the other side of the street carried with them to the park. But I think it's still, in my brief time there, I think it did fill people with dignity, where they felt like they were able to say, look, this is my place here, and I get to make some rules here in a way that people who have no space, who have no place, who have no home, as we imagine it here, people who don't have those kind of spaces often have trouble asserting. And I think some of us take for granted.
Autonomy.
Yeah.
I mean, the camp seemed to be run a lot smoother when we were making sure that people knew who the enemy was, and doing actions like with the smaller encampment. I made sure that we did actions at least twice a week. There was a lot of political education. It wasn't really in like let's all have a meeting and I teach you these things, but it was more in the casual, everyday conversations. And at times, I wasn't really sure if it was getting through to people or not, but kind of at the end of the encampment one day, the CEO of the housing authority had came to the encampment in person, and somebody asked his name, and he said like Kelvin Jeremiah, and this person that I thought like never was listening to any of the stuff I would rant on and on about, it was kind of like, oh, you're the CEO of the housing authority, what are you doing down here? And I was kind of like, okay, so like maybe we don't always see it, but we really did make sure that people really understood like who was making money off of them, who was benefiting off of them, who was really like responsible for the conditions that they lived in. And then we faced like a lot of 3 different eviction threats. And there were a lot of times where it seemed like we wouldn't get anything. So like the relationship was kind of up and down. Like when it looked like it was going good, everybody was really into things. But then when it looked like it was going bad. Sometimes people would be really upset. So I think that the way that the relationship between us and the people that lived in the encampment was like up and down. I mean, there were times where we were almost like enemies because it just seemed like everything was like falling apart or people weren't really trusting things. And then there were times like when we were really good friends. And then there were times when we would sit down, I mean, myself personally, and really get to know some of the people there and really build relationships way deeper than organizer, resident, or people protesting together, but real friendships where I would share things about, you know, my past and people would share things. So I just think it was just really multidimensional and it was up and down and in a lot of things.
You know, I think it's important to talk about that, some of the difficult parts that happened as well, because when a lot of times when the public or even other organizers are looking at a political victory, we tend to romanticize it and only think about the victory. And it's difficult sometimes to get details about how hard it was to get there. Not just hard in terms of fighting your target, but hard in terms of what organizing means, what building new communities means, and some of the challenges that are inherent therein. You know, so I think it's really important that we hear this.
Max, I think that's like one of the things that like a lot of the times when we're dealing with some volunteers, as soon as there's like this break in emotional or somebody yells at somebody, they just want to break it off and they want to leave. Part of like all this work is like staying with it. And honestly, you'll have a fight and somebody you will like not want to come back maybe for 2 or 3 days, but you come back. You have to come back unless there's some irreparable harm that happens. So that happens too. But in general, staying with the harshness and the harm is part of us like getting together, especially people that come from many different places, thousands of different places in this world.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it's coming back is part of building a long-term movement. And that's really what we need to be doing. So I think that's important to say. All right. So this is happening. You have taken over several individual units, and now there are these 2 and then eventually 1 tent cities, encampments. What do we call it? The city has taken notice. Someone comes down from the housing authority. Obviously, the city police are watching. So the city has taken notice. So how does it happen that you get into a discussion with them about getting units for them? How does the discussion begin, and then how do they proceed? How did you ultimately end up getting this thing? Like, you know, how did you approach them? Did you go to find someone and say, "Can I get 50 housing units from you?" What happened exactly?
Okay, I guess I can start or do you want to start, Sterling?
No, you can start.
Yeah, I think like what's important that I tell a lot of people who reach out and ask about things is like that the city knew us like before we built this encampment. Like I was already like banned from the PHA board meetings, and I've been like drug out of city council a lot of times. And I go to their houses and do direct action. So like it wasn't like, oh, who are these people that built this encampment? They were probably more like, oh, wow, all these crazy people are together and they have this encampment now. So It was kind of like they already knew who we were. They already had contacts for us through email and phone and like all of that. So I think initially we ended up in a first meeting that was more done for show. I feel like the city just did it to say like, oh, we tried to meet with those protesters or whatever. And the PHA was pretending like we weren't there at the time. So there was like an initial meeting where we took a bunch of residents and we all went, and the city kind of just talked about a bunch of nothing. And after a while, I think it was Sterling who just kind of like read through the demands and was just like, can you do this? Can you do this? Can you do this? And we all left kind of angry. That Sunday, that was on a Friday. That Sunday was the day that I moved a bunch of people up to PHA in the middle of the night. And so that like we could hurry up and get our tents down before they would notice us and try to get rid of us. And the next day, PHA was just building a fence around us and bulldozing at us, and they had all these cops, and it became like a big thing, and somebody in the neighborhood called the media and the news ended up coming out. So that whole thing got like called off, but we were like half gated in, like, and they were just like running
You mean
bulldozers at
the
us.
eviction got called off because the media was there?
Yeah, I think it was just because there was like the Parkway encampment was there, and then the media ended up coming, and it just looked like a big circus. There was like a guy from the NBC 10 news that just like interviewed me, and he was like, "What is this? Like, I've been reporting for 30 years, and I've never seen anything like this. Like, they had maintenance like building a fence around us. They didn't clear the scene, and there were like bulldozers just running at homeless people, and there were like cops, and like we're pulling the fences out of the mud as they put them in, and then they're like grabbing them back out of our hands, and it was just like it was like a circus. It really was. And so it got like called off, and that's kind of when PHA ended up coming to the table, and then we ended up like in this months-long process where we would like go back and forth, and the city would offer like all this stuff like shelter beds or COVID prevention hotels
or treatments.
So they were offering you all kinds of other enticements other than actual housing and you're saying those enticements did not exist.
Well, yeah, they just wouldn't exist. This is like my like kind of insider strategy of like, I know these processes. So like, I will just say like, so I know when they say treatment, they're talking about like something that doesn't even fucking exist, right? I called them 10 days. There wasn't a bed available for this person that wanted treatment. Or like the COVID prevention hotel. Why? Okay, if it's available, why am I putting all these applications in and everyone keeps getting denied? Tell me what's available. And that's not even for us. You're lying to us. And then I would go to the media and I would say, Mayor Kenny's a liar. They would say, you put in 140 people into, I'm like, show me the fucking list of people. They are all at this encampment. So that's all. Those are the things you got to do, to kind of, you got to say. Because I'm like, every one of those people, I was like, I lie. They're liars. The treatment system spits them back out. People want or trying to get your services, but they can't even get the services even if they wanted them. And how are they supposed to trust them when they've been kicked out of 4 different places? So I'm like, those people are lying. Every one of those, that's what I would just say to the media all the time. Fine, because they all like to preach outside the encampment. I just go to them one by one and then just yell at them, stuff like that.
And when you're doing that, when you're attacking them, when you're calling them liars, you're not at that point worried about losing your deal.
No, that's the truth. That's the whole point.
Yeah. The deal. I mean, the deal is like a legal agreement. It's like signed. It's like a real agreement. So
you.
Yeah, losing the deal. Losing what? We didn't lose it. We didn't have anything. That's why it's like.
Yeah, and the deal came at the end. I mean, most of the process, we didn't really think we were getting anything.
Mm-hmm. All right. So then you go through this process. You're they're making you offers, which you identify as bogus offers. And finally, they make an offer. They make you start making legitimate offers. And at some point, they say, here's 50 units plus. So at some point, 60 to 70 units. So this seems like then your entire team at this point is like, yes, let's do this. We want it. This is what we've been fighting for the whole time. This is exactly what we want. And you jumped at the chance first. You jumped at the offer first chance you got. Is that right?
Kind of. It was actually like at first, I think like I had the PHA and the city had been saying like it was against HUD guidelines to transfer properties. It was illegal. We were asking them to commit a crime. And I kind of like had really quietly like emailed HUD and put in this inquiry and asked about like the properties, and HUD had emailed me back and was like, yeah, PHA can transfer properties to their board of commissioners and they don't need us, which I do because I've been to all of their board meetings. And so I think that kind of might have been what led them to offer houses. But even when they first offered houses, they were like trying to offer 15 houses. And then they were showing us houses that were like falling down in the back and had trees going through them. So it wasn't like a jump at thing. It was still a few weeks of like arguing and going back and forth. And then kind of what happened was the housing authority encampment was actually on a $52 million construction project that we blocked for 3 months. And so what really happened was they were going to lose $52 million if we didn't vacate that premises. So that's where I got a phone call one day from the CEO of the PHA, and he made the offer for the agreement for the smaller encampment. And that's kind of where that came from. And then after we took that offer, a lot of people were kind of like, oh, PHA is going to back out now and they're not going to help with the Parkway encampment. But I knew that that wasn't the case because I knew that they would be under a lot of pressure. They had gone behind the city's back and made this agreement while the city was still dealing with this big mess on the Parkway. And I knew that it was pretty strategic to take the Camp Teddy deal. And it was that led to the 50 house offer for the larger encampment.
Wow. Well, that's interesting. It looks like if you threaten $50 million from this, a $50 million windfall from the city, they'll give you a couple $1 million worth of concessions, it looks like. So I think this is a great lesson about the importance of direct action.
Yeah.
Think,
I just think that's the most important thing. The fact of the matter is that it came down to the money that they're going to lose. And if Jenn did not sit on the property that needed to be developed, as other people can do around the country, sit on the fucking place, sit on that place that they need to develop.
And that's what did it. That's what pushed them over the edge.
It wouldn't have happened if you didn't, if that wasn't the case and there wasn't a timeline for them to develop it.
All right, so that's how you did the negotiation with the city. What about your internal discussions inside of Philadelphia Housing Action? Were you clear that this is what you wanted? I mean, this seems like a big step. I remember when I was with a group called Take Back the Land, and we got our first offer, which we did not win, by the way. We did not get as far as you've gotten here. When we got our first offer, we had some confusion inside of Take Back the Land because we were going from being protesters to potentially being what, a landlord? Is that what we really want? We're protesting landlords, and we had the chance to become a landlord, and that didn't sit too well with anyone. What was your internal, aside from what you were dealing with the city, what was your internal discussion like? Was there unanimity around the idea that you should take this deal and you should get the housing and you should develop it or do whatever it is you're going to do with it?
Yeah, I mean, we have that same thing of like, how the hell did we protest ourselves into being technically landlords? Like, I still think about that every single day of my life now. But I feel like, I guess from myself, speaking for myself personally, it's kind of like, I think that even having this property and being this like so-called landlord or whatever is still very revolutionary. And I think that it would have been really selfish not to take it just because of my own ideologies around being a landlord, because this is like, taking this land is doing so much for so many people, not just the people that were squatting or homeless in the encampments or homeless at all, but like these are 70 properties that PHA was going to sell to private developers who were going to build $1 billion condos that were going to like run people out of the neighborhood. So I think for myself, like all of what can be saved by taking these properties outweighs like whatever other ideas I have around like being some sort of property manager.
Wow. Yeah, I think that that's like the main point. It's like the RAD like program specifically that started by the Obama administration, Julian Castro. Those people that tried to neoliberal our way to sustainability or something. But all they've done is take this public property and made this like easy way to give it to private developers. And places that are targeted inside of Philadelphia are these neighborhoods like Brewerytown and Charleswood and places in West Philly, like Mantua. This is the way that the housing authority is like a deliberate actor in gentrification, displacement, and ultimately the genocide of the people that live in those neighborhoods. And I think like laying that out for people and then seeing how the nonprofits like are a part of it too. The way that I just couldn't believe it. Jenn has said this for years. The way that they take those houses and then they give them to like these nonprofits, the subsidies to the nonprofit, and then they just dispose of the houses to like some lecherous like private developer that then like builds like a 3-story whatever like monstrosity in a neighborhood. Shit like that. I have a vision. I think we have a vision of like creating like stopping all the displacement. I will tell you, there's this one last building in West Philly called the Art Villa that the nonprofit housing developer sold it and then displace like forced probably like 40 people in this neighborhood in West Philly. It was like the last building inside of this catchment. The University of Penn, they take all their white children, they take them to the school, and it's been drained of all the black students in this really good school in West Philly, in this catchment that's been targeted by all the white people to displace all the black people from this neighborhood. It's not even a race thing like that. All the poor people are being pushed out. And instead of like actually trying to stop it, the people I was working with were like, "Oh, we just need a soft landing for those people." And what we know is like, no, we don't need a soft landing. We need to make sure that we got somebody on every single block that yells at the gentrifiers. Everybody on every single block, and that's houses that will be in the community land trust, that's going to harass the gentrifiers and all the displacers and all the people trying to change the neighborhood. It's like, nah, not today. First, the people on my block, they're trying to talk to the drug dealers, and we just tell them to shut the fuck up. I don't care about your security card. And you give a middle finger to the security camera every single day. That's what we do in our neighborhood, you know, in West Patcham, because like those people, they don't deserve to be there. You're not going to try to like talk to people, be in the neighborhood, be among us, and fuck you. You know, that's our position on this stuff. You know?
Yeah. I feel like we've complained about this thing for so long, and I've complained about this thing for so long, and put my body on the line for it for so long, and watched so many people like be harmed, that like turning this down, then what could I say? How would I feel if I turned down like one of the deal for the smaller encampment was like 9 houses that are on one block that are all red, that would be like, it's like a small working class and poor black street where people have all been there forever. And so if we turn that deal down, then what happens is PHA sells all those houses to private developers, and this whole block is flipped, and everybody's like run off of it. So how would I feel later on if, like, because I didn't want to be labeled as a landlord, like every person on this block, some of these people that I know that have been really supportive are like now gone. Like it would have just been like, to me, like I can't complain about this thing in the future that I see happening if I like turn down this opportunity to actually stop it from happening. Like 70 houses not going to developers makes a really big difference in the future of this neighborhood.
Yeah. And just to be clear, the houses that we're talking about are going to a community land trust. So technically you wouldn't be the landlord, even if you would be part of the management team or or have one of the votes in the land trust. Is that right?
Yeah. Nobody is going to own the house. Like I don't own the houses. Sterling doesn't own the houses. The people who live in them don't own them. They're like owned by the land trust, and like kind of decisions are made collectively about them.
So as far as I've been able to tell, this is the first time something like this is happening, where we've had a direct action that resulted in a city handing over huge chunks of land, huge actual housing to an organization, and not even like some politically well-connected organization. It's to people who have been protesting the housing authority this whole time, right? So I think this has the potential to be a game changer, both for the community that is going to benefit from it, but also for a movement that's going to be looking back at this. What are your hopes then for the people who needed housing and participated in the protests? And what are your hopes for the way that this victory is going to impact the so-called social justice movement in the United States?
I mean, I don't even think that it's really happening, but I really think that there has to be a change in the way that we're doing this. The paid organizer model is not working. Money is still just going to people's pockets, and it's just, we got to figure out a different way to do this. I guess that's what I would hope that we see, and because we need to stop the gentrifier, the like displacement situation, and also just take it, and not do like one action that's symbolic, but like create the space for people to actually be in this place. So, I don't think people have it. I don't think people have the balls to do it. I don't know. I just don't. I'm starting to lose faith in it.
You don't think this is going to spread beyond You don't think you're about to inspire a bunch of other organizations to do the same thing, formal or informal organizations?
No, I don't.
I'm going to invite you back when I prove you wrong.
No, no, they're not willing to do it. Everybody I talk to.
Let's see. I don't think people have seen it. I don't think people have seen it done, and therefore they couldn't be the first one to do it. But once it's done, I think you're going to have a flock of organizations who are jumping to do it. We'll see. Of course, time will tell. But I think you have just sparked something that you don't realize yet. That's
well, I will tell you, Max. I talk to people, and we say exactly what needs to be done, and I will say it over and over again. They won't do it, and I feel like I talk to people.
They need to see the model. We'll see. It'll play out over time, but I think they need to see it done before they could. A lot of people do, and you guys didn't, but a lot of people do. Jenn, what are your hopes for the people who were there, and what are your hopes for the impact this has, if any, on the broader movement?
Yeah, I mean, my hopes for the people that are there is like that they can rise up, like not just have a place to stay, but like that this really builds like self-esteem, and this really builds self-sufficiency for people, and that it builds, a community where we could continue to fight beyond what we've gained here, and where people are able to take care of themselves, where they're understanding the way that the system was holding them back, and the concessions that come from the system aren't really worth everything that comes, behind it, and where there's like a more self-sustaining community where people aren't dependent on others, like where it's a community, but not a community like relationship where it's just like, I need this, and like where people are able to do for themselves and others, I guess. And like for the movement overall, I mean, I do hope that it inspires other people. I mean, I totally feel where Sterling is coming from, because we do talk to people, and they just don't really seem down to do the things that we did. But I mean, we have not talked to everybody. And I mean, for the movement, I hope that people see to not always aim small, like aim big, aim for what you want, and that you can take power away from the government. Like, let's shift the movement. Like, let's stop protesting for the government to do something for us, and let's protest for the government to give us back everything that they've taken from us, so that we can, do for ourselves. Because I think the movement is a lot of times focused on like what the government should do for the people. And like, I'd rather see the movement focus on the government giving back the people everything that they stole from us, and allowing us to rebuild and have our own communities.
Yeah. Because there's something like among this like group of people that is about like creating, kind of like maroon society, kind of like partisan society, like a whole different society from the thing that is, and whether you need like a movie like The Matrix or whatever to like make yourself understand that, it's all about cutting us off. Because like basically some of the power people probably see us and they're like, okay, we can co-opt them, and they would give us money. They would give us a lot of money to do their bidding, but we have to reject that, like, and a lot of people won't. There's so many different decisions within this that are about rejecting all the ways that they try to use their power and influence to like bring you in, take their tendrils and put it in there, and we have to reject every single one of them. And all the things in me, like this, like little gay boy that wants to say be nice and happy and stuff, like I have to reject all those things, right? Say like, oh, well, I got reached out by this person, or this person seems nice. You have to reject every single one of those instincts. Yeah, I just don't see other people, even when we say it, because it's really hard. And I don't know, it's hard for myself to say like, no, we don't want anything. We don't want any of it, because we're going to build it ourselves, and we don't need you. And we understand all of the ways, whether you just get it because you know the system, because you've been like sitting in the county assistant's office, or you read some Foucault or whatever. It's like all these little things, Do you understand? There are strings. The strings that are good. You take foundation money, there's strings. Even if they say there are no strings, there's strings,
Yeah.
So.
All right. Sterling and Jenn, thank you so much for being with us here. And thank you so much for your work with Philadelphia Housing Action.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, that's our show. Thank you for listening to The Next World. I'm Max Rameau, and you can find out more about my work at pacapower.org. That's P-A-C-A power.org. You can read more in depth on many of the issues we talked about, including land and housing, on our Partners in Dignity and Rights website, dignityandrights.org. We'll be back with another episode of The Next World soon. Until then, please tell your friends about us and help us spread the word about this podcast. Goodbye for now, and remember, organize, organize, organize.